Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel many times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, many different styles, and I think it's fair to say that this brewery is just very solid all round. They were one of the first Swedish breweries that I discovered when I first moved over here back in 2015. Back then they were known for their kind of fruity sour beers and also for their big Imperial Stouts, but they have diversified a lot in recent times and they are definitely worth checking out if you are interested in the Swedish craft beer scene. But the beer that we're going to have a look at today is a style that I know these guys can do very well, and based on a few of the beers we've had within this style category recently, I think this one should be really quite interesting to try. It's one of their latest releases through Systembolaget as well, so we'll need to crack on and just see what this one is going to have in store for us. So hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again, Göteborg as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get the Gothenburg catchphrase in when we're reviewing Gothenburg beers because it is just channel tradition. We're going to go out to the east of the city a little bit to Landvetter, close to the airport, and that means that we're going to have a look at another beer from the wonderful Bryggeri. So this particular beer is called Mega. It comes in at 15% ABV, and this one is an Imperial Stout. So we've had a couple of beers from the Mega series recently, and from what I understand, this one is basically the base Imperial Stout that they use for the Mega series, and that was the main reason that I wanted to try this one. But yeah, a big 15% Imperial Stout monster. Dugges, very, very well known for their Imperial Stouts, of course. My favourite ones would probably be the Key and the Sidamo Dimtube. Dugges are very solid when it comes to Imperial Coffee Stouts, in my opinion. So yeah, trying this one, which is the base of one of their big series these days, I think should be very, very interesting. The classic Imperial Stout from these guys, of course, is the Idiot and the Big Idiot. So I hope they rebrew the original Idiot at some point as well. But yeah, needless to say, very curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us. Let's crack on and see what we have then. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Dugges Bryggeri before, and you will no doubt see more added to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and you can of course go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on the geography tagging system. So city, county, state, prefecture, whatever it is, go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on that. They will pop up, and you can of course check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Swedish playlist along with many others, and that's constantly being added to. But yeah, let's crack on then and talk a little bit about Dugges Bryggeri once again. So, Dugges Bryggeri, as I've mentioned to you before, are based in Landvetter on the eastern outskirts of Gothenburg, Göteborg, up on the Swedish west coast, and the brewery was established back in 2005 in Mölndal to the south of the city by Mikael Engström Dugge, whom of course it takes its name from. But a few years prior to this, Mikael had met an Englishman who was selling breweries second hand around Europe, from what I understand, and this really got him thinking about brewing his own beer. So he studied the very complex Swedish alcohol laws, he visited other breweries that were already operating in the country, and he started buying up equipment to put together his own brewery, and all of this activity culminated with the opening of the first Dugges facility in Mölndal back in 2005. Over the first few years, he continued to experiment and brew different beers and just get his name out there a little bit more, but he was continually expanding the brewery capacity. But by 2009, they had outgrown their original facility, and so they made the decision to move, and they did that the following year in 2010 and went up to Landvetter, close to the airport. But the older brewery had a capacity of only 1,500 hectolitres of beer per year, about 150,000 litres, but the new brewery started off with a capacity of 8,000 hectolitres. So yeah, that's about 800,000 litres per year. And from what I understand, this has been more than doubled in recent years. But over the years, of course, the brewery became known for different things. In the early days, I would say they were best known for their kind of fruity sour beers and also for their big Imperial Stouts. Two of the classic Dugges beers would be the Tropic Thunder, which they did is a collaboration with Stillwater Artisanal. That was the kind of beer that really kicked off the sour scene in Sweden, many would argue, and also the Egypt, the big Imperial Stout. So try those if you get the chance, although the Egypt these days is called the Big Egypt. I think they kind of scaled it up a little bit. But in recent times, they've been doing quite a few different things. They've invested a lot in their barrel aging program. The Future series and the Mega series, of course, incorporate this. They've been doing a lot of different IPAs, both of West Coast and New England. They had the Fresh and the Crush series on the New England side of things. They had the Bite series when it came to the West Coast side of things. Yeah, they've started canning a number of their beers in recent times as well. So yeah, a lot of the IPAs now come in half-litre cans instead of the 330ml bottles like this, so you can keep your eye out for those. But yeah, they also are involved in the two brewers beer bars in Gothenburg. The original one is Tredje Långgatan, and they own these along with All In Brewing, who are one of the numerous gypsy breweries operating in the Gothenburg area, and Electric Nurse, which is run by Mikael's daughter Ida and her husband John. So yeah, Dugas Bryggeri, as I say, one of the kind of, you know, Mikael Engström Duga, I guess, is one of the kind of godfathers of Swedish craft brewing, and these guys are one of the most respected names in the Swedish craft beer scene. Actually, these guys are very, very well known and always doing really, really solid beers. So my advice would be go to the Brewers Beer Bar on Tredje Långgatan and have a little look. I filmed an out and about video there maybe about 2-3 years ago now. But yeah, it is definitely worth going to check out. And you'll find Dugas beers, All In, and Electric Nurse beers there that you won't find anywhere else. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Dugas Bryggeri for the moment. If you want to learn more about them, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can, of course, check out the Untappd page to learn more about their different beers. Or you can check out some of my older reviews as well. We've been reviewing Dugas beers for about 7, nearly 8 years now, which is just crazy to think. So yeah, let's get on and actually have a little look at this beer itself. That's all you need to know about Dugas Bryggeri for the moment. So as you can see, the artwork on this one is kind of pretty much as you would expect. You can see they've got the nice Dugas D on there. I do wish they would put that on the bottle caps actually, because it would look pretty cool. But yeah, there you can see the Dugas Bryggeri thing on the side there, and this one is, of course, it says more is more is more is more. So yeah, Dugas like to put these little hop flower things. But yeah, Dugas Mega Imperial Stout, 15% ABV. It says on the side here, no fuss, just big, bigger, biggest mega. That's big, bigger, biggest mega. But I actually had a little look at the Dugas website, and it tells you a little bit about the story of this beer. And since this one is the kind of base beer, I think, for the Mega series, it's kind of worth reading. So let me just read this little bit to you, the story text. So it says, in the early beginnings of Dugas, this could have been around 2005 or 2006, we had a brewer who tried to brew the strongest beer he could. That attempt ended up a 16% volume Imperial Stout, which never saw the light of day. It didn't taste right. Scaling that recipe down, however, it tasted just fine, and it got us to brewing Egypt, one of our most iconic beers, just like I said. Fast forward to 2021, we wanted to reconnect with that ambition of not brewing something big, bigger or biggest, but brewing something mega. So the Mega series was born, big 15% volume adjunct stouts, which had extra everything and even more on top, and a side of all you could ever want, and then some. Weirdly, funnily, and or strangely enough, we've never brewed a clean version, one that really connected to our roots. So we've rectified that and now gone full circle. We're back. Maybe not brewing the strongest beer we can, but brewing something really strong, and this time it tastes just right. So yeah, like I said, this one is essentially the kind of base beer for the Mega series, and that was the main reason I wanted to try this. It doesn't tell you anything about the hops or anything like that in there, so we can get rid of that just now and just focus on the beer. But yeah, like I say, 330ml bottle. I want to say that I paid 80 Swedish kroner for this. It could have been a little bit more, to be honest with you, but 80 Swedish kroner, so that's about €8, £7.50 sterling, probably somewhere in the region of $9 American. And for a big 15% Imperial Stout, I don't think that's too bad at all. But yeah, this one is the Dugas Mega. Let's see what this is going to have in store for us. So a little bit of smoke on the opening. Let's get this guy out into the glass and see what we have. This thing is going to be an absolute monster, I'm sure. As I said to you, I always enjoyed a Dugas Imperial Stout, so trying this one should be very, very nice. And this one is yeah, it's all barley malt. No mention of wheat or oats in this. So this potentially could be an old school Russian Imperial Stout. We'll need to see. But yeah, anyway, before the head disappears, then you can see that this beer has poured with about a quarter finger of a frothy, I would say, kind of light to medium tan head. That is fading away, of course, to be a very kind of thin foamy layer, but you would expect that when it's such a high alcohol content beer. If it had a bit of wheat in it, the head might hold up a little bit more. But in terms of colour, this one is pretty much what you'd expect. It's got that lovely, big, dark, ebony rosewood colour. So one or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there, and the head incidentally has faded away to just be, you know, a ring around the edge of the glass. But overall, it does look pretty damn nice, pretty much as you would expect from a big Imperial Stout. But yeah, it looks good. Just let you have a little closer look at that for yourself. You can see the kind of foamy ring around the edge of the glass there, and that dark ebony rosewood colour. Now remember, the colour of your beer depends on 1, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. Any barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts that you put into the beer will play a role as well, but when it comes to black beers like Imperial Stouts and so on, it's very difficult for the adjuncts to do anything like that. But with Imperial Stouts, of course, you can do things like, you know, boil the wort longer. That'll give you a kind of darker colour to it. And of course, you can do double mash and things, which is going to affect the kind of opaqueness or the opacity of the beer, I guess we could say. But this one, I think, looks pretty good. If we shine the light through it, it does have a little bit of that kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or, you know, chestnut coloured edge, but this one is pretty much black as night. It's as dark as you're going to get. So yeah, I don't think we need to say anything else about the appearance of this one. We can have a little look at the aroma and just see what it has in store for us. So let's do that then. Oh yeah. Now I'm going to say straight away, that's really quite interesting. It's got a really nice balance between being slightly sweet, but also being a little bit roasty and toasty. You know, that is quite interesting. As I say, a little bit of a, it does have a little bit of that Russian Imperial Stout roasty toasty type thing, but then yeah, you've also got a little bit of that, you do also have a little bit of that kind of, how would you say, you've just got a little bit of that kind of, you know, brown sugary chocolatey type character to it as well. So it's not a Russian Imperial Stout and it's not a sweet stout. It's kind of somewhere in the middle actually, but very interesting. So yeah, where do we start with this one then? It's a very nice smelling beer, I have to say, actually, and quite, to be honest with you, compared to the other Imperial Stouts we've had in recent times, this one's quite different. So let's try and break that down and just describe it for you a wee bit more in depth, if you like. So, middle third of the palate. Why am I saying middle third of the palate? Backbone of the beer. Brain is not working today, guys, it really isn't. So, backbone of the beer. You can smell the nice roasty, toasty, well-fired black malt backbone. You can smell a little bit of that in here, but it's not too pungent. It's not, yeah, it's not too pungent and it's not too dry, but yeah, definitely a little bit of that roasty, toasty, well-fired backbone in here. Within that, you do get a little touch of woodiness. You also get a little touch of nuttiness as well. Yeah, so roasty, toasty, well-fired backbone, a little bit of nuttiness, a little bit of woodiness. On top of that, you get a bit of brown bread, and it's a bit hard to place whether it's like a sweet rye bread or more of a wholemeal bread. I'm leaning more towards saying that it's a wholemeal bread rather than anything else, because it just doesn't come across as being all that sweet. So yeah, a little bit of wholemeal bread, a little bit of, maybe a tiny little bit of that sweeter kind of rye sort of thing. But yeah, the bready notes in this beer are quite kind of grainy and a bit drier actually. So yeah, it's not the sweetest and oiliest of Imperial Stouts that we've had from Dugas, and it kind of goes to show you that maybe a lot of the kind of oiliness and things we've had from some of the other things in the Mega Series that has been due to the adjuncts. So this is interesting. So yeah, black, roasty well-fired bread crust, woodiness, little touch of nuttiness, wholemeal brown bread, a little touch of rye bread. On top of that, you actually get a little bit of, on top of that, you get a little bit of a kind of chocolatey character. So there is definitely some, you know, sort of 70-ish% cocoa chocolate in there. It's almost got a bit of the cocoa nibby dryness for sure. So you've got a little bit of that, but further forward on the nose, you maybe do get a little bit of a more kind of 40% cocoa, milky chocolate character in there. So yeah, there's a little bit of that going on for sure. But within that, you get a nice, within that, you do get a little bit of a nice kind of brown sugary character. So there's a little bit of, that kind of slightly toasty brown caramel forming the base, if you like. So there's a bit of toasty brown sugar in there. On top of that, a bit of a treacly molasses kind of note. Yeah, so a little bit of treacly molasses character, bit of a sweeter caramel, and as I say, some kind of toasty brown sugar. Yeah, kind of interesting. Other than that, I don't think there's anything much to say about the malt base of the beer. When it comes to the hoppy side of things, you do get a little bit of earthiness out of this one. There is a little bit of floral character there and a wee bit of kind of wet grassiness. But you know, the Imperial Stout is not the most hop forward of beer styles. So yeah, we don't have to say too much about that. But a little touch of floral character, a little bit of grassiness and a wee bit of earthiness. I think that covers it quite nicely. But on the on the fruity side of things, it's got a lovely little bit of raisiny sharpness in the top of the nose. There's a big bit of a kind of plummy character as well, which I do really enjoy. So a little bit of raisiny character, a little bit of plummy note in there, and then you've also got a little bit of raisin, a little bit of a kind of juicy plum, a little bit of blackcurrant and blackberry as well. You know, you've got all of these kind of more oily, fruity characters. There's maybe a tiny little touch of like a muffiny or cake, like, you know, chocolate muffin, chocolate brownie type note to the beer. But other than that, it's you know, it's pretty it's kind of giving you everything. I mean, this beer, it's one of these ones that gives you nothing unexpected, if you like, but it's kind of interesting just how balanced it is between Russian Imperial Stout and a slightly sweeter stout. So I'm curious to see how that's going to transpire in the flavour. It's certainly not the most complex of stouts that we've had from Dugas Bryggeri, and I wouldn't say straight off that it's my favourite aroma that I've had from them within this style category either. But we need to see what it's like. But yeah, let's have a taste of this one and see what it's all about. As I always say though, take a bit of time to enjoy the aroma before you get stuck in. So yeah, this one is the Mega 15% Imperial Stout from Dugas Bryggeri in Landvetter near Gothenburg here in Sweden. Slange, skål, cheers. Ooh. That's pretty damn nice. I'm going to say straight away, with this one, the flavour, I was kind of I was a bit underwhelmed by the aroma, as you could probably tell, but the flavour of this is pretty damn good. And in the flavour as well, the thing you're going to notice with this beer is when you take it in, it has a lot more Russian Imperial Stout RIS character than I thought it was going to. It really has a good little bit of that kind of roasty, toasty bitterness on the backbone. So that's very, very nice in this beer. But yeah, the way that this goes together, I think, is really quite nice. Yeah, that is pretty good, I have to say. So thumbs up to Dugas once again. It's quite a raw, old school, big bitter Russian Imperial Stout, this one, but at the same time, you know, you've got that big oily mouthfeel at this one. I think, just going from the way the mouthfeel is, I think this is probably double mash, maybe even triple mash, you never know. And this is a big, big oily thing, but as I say, it gives you a big roasty bitter kick in the aftertaste. But yeah, let's break this down and describe it properly for you, as we always do. So, yeah, middle third of your palate then. You've got that nice roasty, toasty, well-fired backbone, as I said. So, yeah, that big well-fired bread crust is just kind of sitting there forming the base of the beer. As you go further forward, as you go further forward, um, into the middle third of your palate, you will get one or two little woody characters in there, and there is a wee touch of nuttiness actually. But on top of that kind of well-fired bread crust, you do have a definite kind of oily, wet, sweet kind of German rye bready character there, and that's just sitting there on top of the kind of bread crust, and of course you've got the nuts and the other things just kind of sitting inside that. So yeah, on top of all of that, we have, as we say, on top of that, there's, on top of the kind of bready character, it's almost a little bit of a cake, you know. It's like as I say, it's almost like a slightly, as I say, rye bread, oily wet rye bread, maybe brandy soaked cake as well could be another way to describe that. But as I say, the further forward on that middle third of your palate you go, there's a little bit of a nutty and kind of woody thing sat in there as well, which is kind of interesting. But on top of the bready, cakey layer, you get the kind of chocolatey notes that I was talking about. And I have to say, this beer, in some ways, particularly the aftertaste, in some ways, this beer really is kind of what I was expecting from the aroma. So, the back of that middle third part is kind of interesting. I was waiting to see if the chocolate kind of pushed its way out a little bit more, but yeah, the back of the middle third of your palate, you can feel you've got that quite high percentage cocoa chocolate. It's almost got a little bit of dryness to it as well, like it's a kind of roasty or charred chocolate, something like that. But at the back of that middle third of your palate, you get the kind of, 80-90% cocoa chocolate there. But as you move, and this sits on top of the bready layer, as it moves further forward, as you move further forward on the palate, I should say, you start to get the kind of sweeter and more milky chocolate aspects out of this one. So yeah, you can feel that 80-90% cocoa kind of transitions to about 50-60 in the middle of the palate, then a sort of 40 or 30% cocoa chocolate as you reach the front of that middle third of your palate. But there's a little bit of a kind of vanilla type quality in there as well, which is quite interesting. So I really like how that goes together. So yeah, a little bit of vanilla kind of mixing in with the chocolate on the front half of that front third of your palate too. But then above all of that chocolate, you're starting to get the brown sugars. So let's focus on those. So the brown sugary notes for me, it's kind of layered, but they're not overly leathery either, which is kind of interesting. So that tells me that this beer hasn't had such a long wort boil. The more dryness and leathery character you get from the brown sugars, the more, as you would say, the longer the wort boil has been. But yeah, in the dead centre of your palate, you can feel you've got that nice oily, you do have that nice kind of oily treacle molasses type note. And as you move, and of course that's the alcohol, and as you move further out from that, you do have a little bit of a more straight up caramel, and then underneath all of that, you do have a more kind of toasty, brown sugary sort of thing. So yeah, I like how that goes together actually. Yeah, you definitely have a little bit of that more kind of toasty brown sugary thing, and treat oily treacle molasses, sweet caramel, and then the roasty toasty elements just kind of sitting underneath it actually. So yeah, the way all of that goes together, I think, is pretty awesome. So it gets a big thumbs up from me. Yeah. I think we've described everything we kind of need to in that middle third of the palate, and this, of course, is where the biggest complexity of the beer is. So yeah, let's go to the back third of the palate then. The border region between middle third and back third of your palate. Again, you get a little bit of that kind of bready build up there. Base of the back third of the palate. The roasty, well-fired bread crust is a little bit stronger and more intense. As we always say, the more bitter, roasty flavours come out further back on the palate, the sweeter ones come out further forward. But yeah, roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crusty notes above that are sitting there. On top of that, you get the kind of rye bready, cakey layer there, which is a bit taller but a bit more airy. And all of that kind of goes together really nicely. So yeah, again, I do quite like how that goes together. But that big oily sort of cakey type thing, and then above all of that, you start to get a wee bit more of the kind of airy, yeasty qualities coming out of the beer. Although in fairness, some of the dryness from the kind of roasted chocolate flavours that I was talking about, that kind of sits on top of the kind of rye bready type layer that I was describing earlier. But above all of that, you've got the kind of yeasty side of the beer. So let's just take a wee look at that. So yeah, the kind of yeasty side of the beer for me is more, yeah, it's got that more kind of it has a little bit that more airy brown, like sort of sweet rye, brandy soaked fruit loaf type thing. You get some of that in the top of that back third of your palate there, and that obviously will be to do with the kind of yeast and things that they're using. But yeah, this beer, it really does get more bitter and darker, I think, the further into the aftertaste that you go. So it's really interesting, actually, just to try this as a base. And see how it goes. But the more and more that I drink of this beer, I start to think, yeah, Russian Imperial Stout. I do start to think Russian Imperial Stout. So yeah, back third of the palate, you've got that nice kind of tall flavour there. Then as you come further forward, it just kind of condenses down a little bit and squashes together. And this is quite a common thing with beers. We've talked about this in many videos before. But let's move on to the hoppy and fruity side of this one then. So back corners of the palate, you do have a nice little bit of earthiness in there. Be curious to know what hops they were using in this, but as you move further forward, it gets a little touch herbal, and as you reach the front corners of the palate, that kind of, the sort of earthy and herbal thing spreads forward a little bit, but there is a wee bit of a more oily floral character there on the front corners of your palate. As you go round the front curve of the tongue, it's a little bit lighter and more grassy, of course, but again, it's quite a wet grassiness. The Imperial Stout is not the most hop forward of beer styles. But let's, look at the front third of your palate and the fruity side of things. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, you get a little bit of a bready build up in there. It's got a wee bit of a kind of cakey thing to it. Yeah, it's a wee bit of that, yeah, it is a wee bit of that kind of cakey, it's like chocolate muffin. Yeah, it's a little bit of a kind of chocolate muffin, Cladka, sort of brandy soaked rye bread. I think all of that, it's kind of interesting how all of that kind of goes together actually. But yeah, it's yeah, kind of interesting in that sense. So you've got a little bit of that. That's the border region between front third and middle third of your palate. The base of the front third of your palate is a little bit more of a kind of smooth. You get a little bit of the roasty, toasty bread crust underneath, but there's a bit more of a smooth brown bread in there. And on top of that, you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy, fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. So let's look at that. So, on the fruity side of things, it is pretty oily. This beer, we have to say, it's got a lovely big oily fruity character. On top of that base layer that I was talking about, you are getting some of the, the kind of sultana, datey type notes in there. There is a little bit of a dried fruit element to it. But on top of that, when you first take the beer in, yeah, you do get a little bit of you get a little touch of a raisin and a little bit of a prune thing. But this beer, And I was getting this in the aroma, of course, as well. It was the more kind of red fruits, but it's actually the more dried fruity character I'm getting out of this. So yeah, when you take it in, little touch of raisin, little touch of plum, but underneath that, on the back half of that front third of your palate, it's got the dried prunes, it's got the sultana, it's also got the kind of datey character. As you move further forward to the middle of that front third of your palate, there's maybe a little bit of a figgy note to it, and a little bit of a black currant in the front half of the front third of your tongue. But on top of that, it's a little bit more kind of it really is a little bit more of a kind of black berry that you get out of this one. It does have a little bit of that going into the aftertaste, but as I say, it's actually quite a dry fruity character you get out of this beer. So yeah, but the fruity character for me overall is really nice and big and oily, and it goes together really well. So this one, I will say that's one way that this beer diverges from the aroma. I thought it was going to be a lot more red fruity in a way, but it's a lot more kind of along the lines of dried fruit that we get out of this one. So yeah, I like how this goes together. So thumbs up from me. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting beer. This it certainly has. I can feel the booze going to my head just now with this one. It's 15%. I think that's understandable. But yeah, let's round off this review with a wee look at the mouthfeel. Unquestionably, full-bodied beer. Carbonation is very, very smooth, but the mouthfeel overall is quite oily and kind of slick in some ways. In terms of IBUs, I wouldn't be surprised if this beer is a sort of 70-ish, 80 IBU beer, but a lot of that's coming from the malt base, from the, the roasty toasty black malt, and not so much from the hops. The malt base, as we said, roasty toastiness in there, smoothness in the middle, and you've got that big oily brown sugary character on top, and it gets sweeter the further into the aftertaste you go too, and then you've also got the kind of oily fruity characters in there, and also the dry fruity notes as well. So yeah, the way that this beer goes together, I think, is pretty nice. But yeah, it gets a big thumbs up from me. This one, it's in some ways, it's like a slight. I think describing this one stylistically, it's like an old school RIS, but with a big kind of modern bit of sweetness sat on top of it. It's a monster, this beer, and it will go to your head. So I would, if you get a bottle of this, share it. I've still got a little bit to polish off here, but this thing is a monster. But it's a very nice beer. Is it as good as the Big Egypt that I had before? It's a bit difficult to remember, but it's a solid Imperial Stout. You can't ask for much more from this style. But as I say, I do wish that Dugas would do the original Egypt, follow that recipe, and release that once. That would be very cool to see the original before they did the Big Egypt. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. This was the Dugas Mega, which is the base Imperial Stout for the Mega series, and this was pretty interesting to try. So yeah, once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Dugas Bryggeri as well, and we will return to these guys at some point in the fairly near future. But until the next time, slange it just now, and I will see you guys very, very soon. Slange it, skull, and cheers.